Hello and welcome to GovFocus. I'm staff writer Sylvia Oakland, and our panelists today are going to dive into what agentic AI is, determining how agencies can best use agentic AI, and looking at scaling adoption efforts safely and securely. I'm joined by Amanda Bullock, Senior AI Strategist at the Department of Air Force, Digital Office of Transformation, and Jameson Braun, Global Public Sector Vice President at Salesforce. Amanda, Jameson, thank you both so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Grateful to be here. Thanks, Sylvia.
And I don't want to delay the conversation anymore because agentic AI is a really, really big topic. I mean, AI and Gen AI last year were huge, and now we're at that next iteration. So, Amanda, this first question I have is for you. It's a two-parter here, but briefly, do you mind kind of explaining what a agentic AI looks like and what kind of that is?
So, agentic AI is really the next phase of what we're seeing in this generative AI boom. And what it is it really is a way to autonomously work with things like we haven't seen before. So, for instance, an agent can go out and perform the tasks that you would normally do. It can go out and not only look at your emails, but create the responses and then send those responses and then schedule calendar follow ups. And it has ability to really take the next level of that assistant for workers.
Thank you for that definition. It's helpful to have that in context, and that leads me to this next question of what are some of the strategies that you and your team are using to build internal expertise? Because we've heard that we need to bolster that workforce, and Gen AI seem to be a complicated subject to cover. So, how does that compare to agentic AI?
Yeah, so really kudos to the Department of the Air Force for allowing me and my team to really lean in heavily to this. Over the last year, we've trained around 20,000 people across the Department of Defense in generative AI and AI 101. And that has really helped bolster the need and the request for more advanced tools. So the Air Force is looking at a couple different ways to do this. One, they've established a center of excellence in AI. And that really is going to enable all of the different major commands and people to work together to really ensure that we're not just sending out tools, but we're also getting people comfortable with using these tools. So our first round was in generative AI as a whole. We're seeing really high adoption in that. And then I suspect once we get those agentic tools that are able to be used across our workforce, we'll have more training that's more specialized for the agentic tools and how people can best use them.
And Jameson, I would kind of like to pick your brain just a little bit. What are you seeing from that industry side as agentic AI gets adopted?
Thanks, Sylvia. And I'd really like to expand on, Amanda's very articulate definition. I think we need to go back to the spectrum that is artificial intelligence and level set on where organizations or individuals themselves find themselves in the maturity model. Because what we speak about artificial intelligence is this new trend or boom, right? The reality is we've been doing this for 15 years. So the first stage of that maturity model is really predictive analytics, looking backwards at data elements that were applied to some level of object, right? That gave us some additional insight that we may or may not have had, that then we could make objective level decisions on. The second one, as Amanda talked about, is really the generative AI. So think of this in terms of, right, your bots that were able to do basic summarization, synthesis, collation of information that reduce some of the monotony of predominantly human tasks. The third stage that we're in, right, is those autonomous agents. The fourth phase, which is where a lot of corporate America is at right now, is actually in robotic artificial intelligence. So think deployed unmanned aerial vehicles or deployed robots that can help with operator safety and security at the edge that are deployed autonomously by that stage 3 of autonomous agents to take actions, right, to mitigate risk. And then the fifth phrase is really general artificial intelligence. So, which is many multitudes of autonomous agents working cohesively together to solve really critical tasks, right? And it could be on a critical infrastructure grid, or it could be in any line of business that we're in. So I think it's important that we level set just on a maturity model so that everybody identifies where they're at. But what's really exciting is the efficiencies and productivity gains and revenue sharing that we are getting by starting to increase employee engagement, by augmenting these digital labor autonomous agents with our own people to provide greater capacity and throughput. So imagine, I'll give you an example. We're in the state and local 311 space. So think put up street signs, replace stoplights, right, or traffic signals, fix potholes. Imagine that in a normal world, you are capped by the amount of people that you have that are working 40 hours a week. Autonomous agents and sensors can now take action around the sun to autonomously dispatch the people to fill the manholes, right, or the potholes in the roads, to establish a new sign, to do manufacturing. And then think about the municipal codes and the building codes and the electrical codes, or if we're in the federal government, the statutory changes that take place almost daily at this point. How monotonous and how tedious that would be to have to send somebody physically over to the Library of Congress to go through some old stacks to do research. Now we have autonomous agents that can grab that information in seconds, sometimes milliseconds at the metadata like level, to provide insights to the operator to truly transform the way that we provide citizen services.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I just want to pull on there. I'm really glad that you were able to kind of expand on Amanda's definition. Amanda, I saw you nodding your head a lot, and we heard within there, that within milliseconds, and thinking of how much metadata, like you said, is within all of this information. And we're talking a lot about workflows and efficiency and streamlining some of that process. Um, Now that James and you kind of given us that inside look, Amanda, do you mind telling us how agentic AI is kind of helping with those operational efficiencies and, you know, reshaping some of the decision-making processes that you have?
Yeah, so I will say that at least in the Department of the Air Force, we're not quite there yet with agentic AI, but we're much, much closer than I would have expected we would be a year ago. The Department of Defense sometimes tends to be a few years behind our commercial partners. I've been really excited with AI, generative AI, recently that we're starting to catch up a little bit more, but we're still not quite there yet. But we are definitely looking at pilots, use cases for this. The impact that it's going to have is huge. I mean, we're already working in kind of like resource constrained environments. We all don't have enough time to work. And with agentic AI, we can shift decision making from reactive to anticipatory, which will enable us to have earlier interventions. So instead of decision makers spending time on manual data collections, the agents can surface relevant insights, they can highlight anomalies, and they can generate scenario based forecasts. These decisions become dynamic processes rather than one-off events. And those leaders can revisit those strategies as conditions evolve. So instead of having to send out a data call to find all of your information, and then, oh, it's a hot minute tasker and you have to go and you have to do it, leaders and decision makers will have that at their fingertips. They'll be able to reduce the cognitive bias and groupthink while preserving that accountability and oversight. They'll really, when they say that they're making data informed decisions, they'll really have the live real time data to back that up. It's going to shift towards curation, prioritization, and data informed judgments. They can run what if simulations across policy domains and really show that ripple effect with the different decisions. So COA analysis will now be almost instantaneous. They'll be able to have that information at their fingertips, and the properly designed agents that can create a traceable decision log that can be explain why a recommendation was made instead of just saying, this is the recommendation that I made. And that transparency will help build trust, not only with oversight bodies, but with also the employees that decision affects.
What I can tell you is, first and foremost, we have 7,000 paid customers right now on Agentforce. So this is the best of corporate, right, across the globe. And the first example that I'll give you is Adecco or Indeed, which are two of the largest hire to retire staffing services firms that have fully leveraged the autonomous agents and the agentic AI to start delivering these efficiencies. Now think as we pass that over to the Office of Personnel Management, or we send it over to the Department of Defense and the Armed Services to do classifications that are no longer linear in fashion, but actually can swarm the actual job classification functionality and speed up the onboarding of personnel from 280 plus days to say just a couple of weeks. Those are fundamental changes that autonomous agents in digital labor will help us to achieve. Similarly, we always like to talk about the operational domain. So an example that I'll give you is, right, big companies like UPS and DHL and FedEx, who are doing asset management and tracking and supply chain and distribution, all things fundamental to what we do in all 15 federal agencies, are leveraging autonomous agents. So if we can take those use cases and those case studies and bring them directly into the environment without having the federal government thinking that they should DIY their own AI, becomes super powerful in creating speed to that citizen engagement.
Amanda, I saw a really big smile kind of come across your face. Is there anything that you kind of want to piggyback off of that?
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I know that like we had a recent kind of rush of retirees, right? And some of them are waiting on paperwork and things like that. And just the idea that an agent could go through and cut their wait time down from months, into possible, we'll go with weeks. So we would hope days or even hours, but we want to be a little bit realistic here. And I personally use agents in my life almost every day on a personal level. Decision making that I have to do, if I have to find a hotel, I tell it to go, here's the parameters that I want, go find it. And like Jameson said, make the reservations. I'm not quite at the make the reservations for me stage, but I do, have it stop at that. And then I make the reservations myself, but it checks in real time, right? It checks if there's vacancies. It can log into my honors, my Hilton honors account. It can, if I were to allow it to. I'm not quite there yet, but I think that the potential, especially in personnel and especially where we're constrained, and even things like software development and cyberspace, where you could have a bunch of different agents working in parallel to really have the human be like the final decider in that. But they can do all of the work that historically has taken a lot of time to do.
And I'm really glad that you both kind of mentioned, maybe in different ways, but validating those outputs that this, agentic AI puts out there. I think with Gen AI, there was a lot of concern about keeping that human in the loop, and I'm still hearing that now with agentic AI. Jameson, do you mind talking about that a little more about, how do we approach what feels like a challenge? Of validating those outputs.
Well, I think the first, and I'm going to say this a little bit rudimentarily, right? It may come across as elemental. So, which is data is the new currency. So as we go from the industrial revolution to the technology revolution, we are now in an agentic era solely based on data as currency. And oftentimes what we're going to do in the federal government is we think that we're going to wait to try to get our data right, whether it's structured data or unstructured data, instantiated data, authoritative sources of data, right? We're going to put together all these task forces and sub teams to try to clean the data. The benefit of autonomous agents is we can actually start leveraging the data at rest where it sits today to identify the anomalies, to buy us white space and decrease operational risk to move faster. But we have to start with the quick wins. Again, our default position in the federal government will be, let me set up a tag team, let me try to hire some smart people, and we will go DIY our own AI. I would encourage, and I often encourage all of my federal counterparts, don't ever do this. You don't build your own weapon systems. You leverage big corporate America and the industry to help solve these global problems because we have the intellectual capital to do it. Here's another example of let us help you with your data to move faster at the speed of mission. And no time ever has there been where the speed of mission on a global scale has been more paramount. We are in global competition for resources, for grid, for architecture, for preservation, for security, for peace. So our competitive differentiation needs to be in working together to solve phenomenal outcomes.
I'd like to add to that. Jameson, I think, you're right. The only thing that we have the same amount of as the adversary is time, right? That's the only thing. And we know that our adversaries don't necessarily follow the same, standards of work that we do. So how do we cheat that time? And AI, and particularly these agents, are going to be the way to cheat that time. It's going to give us the time back that we need to really enable the warfighter and get those missions faster. So gone are the days of, oh, let me pull all this data from here and there and everywhere, and oh, can I get it? Oh, and now this other agency has it. That's gonna be a way of the past. I really see in the next couple of years we're going to have that ability to just do all of this almost instantaneously. Because right now, if we have garbage data, we get garbage results. But having the agent actually pull the data from the source and clean the data and do all the things that we need. And as a data analyst, I can tell you, my least favorite thing to do is to clean the data and get it prepared for analysis. Having an agent that can do that, given the rules that we need it to follow, is just going to be huge.
And Sylvia, you asked about the, toxicity and hallucinations and the human in the loop, right? So what I can tell you is advanced companies like ourselves, right? I mean, Agentforce is now, right, the brand of who we are. We have a very robust, what we call an Atlas reasoning engine. So, and I want you to think about it as Amanda, talked about the cleaning. So of multiple layers of filtration that take place. So, right, you've established your own guardrails from the beginning. These are the roles that an autonomous agent will play. These are the things it's allowed to do, the things that it's not allowed to do, right? And as it gets smarter and it learns autonomously, these are those large language models with the machine learning embedded directly in it. What we're doing is we're reducing the error variance that takes place on initial output. So I'll give you an example. Dave McKay, who's the CEO and president of the Royal Bank of Canada, hired a multitude of PhDs last year, and he spent millions of dollars on them. And he said, I want you guys to create the most phenomenal artificial intelligence agents for my bank. I want to be number one on the globe in delivering this capability. So, and in a vacuum, this works. And Amanda, having worked in the labs, right, understands the power of vacuum methodologies. So we spent millions of dollars, all this human capital, trying to develop this very unique capability. And then, like we say in the Department of War, right, no plan survives first contact. So the minute I stuck it into practical application, all of the things that I developed no longer worked because I got all these external influences. So the Atlas reasoning engines that we build and other counterparts like us build, right, allow you to start reducing that error variance from, say, 22%, which, as we can agree, is never acceptable in banking and certainly never acceptable in war, all the way down to the single percents or half percents or infinitesimal percents as a part of the systems methodology. Those types of things are what we need to be delivering at speed and at scale.
Thank you. I think that is a really, what you both said really tie into, that forward and future looking perspective that so many agencies and that we're seeing really come about in the culture of AI and especially agentic AI. And so that brings me to this question of how do we make sure that we are continuing to build on the partnerships that we have right now, and how do we build new partnerships to build out this agentic AI ecosystem? Amanda, I'd like to start with you, and then Jameson, if you don't mind closing us out.
So I think that the Office of the Secretary of War, Chief Digital and AI Office is doing a phenomenal job with really leading the charge to do this. They've recently signed some contracts with the Frontier AI, several of the Frontier AI companies, and they're really working hand in hand with them to bring these capabilities to the workforce like I've never seen before. This type of partnership is not something that I've ever really witnessed in my career. And they're jointly defining security testing and frameworks for agentic AI. These things are being developed to go with our risk management framework standards. It's not like, hey, let's fit this square peg into a round hole. It's let's fix the round peg into a round hole. And they're sharing those standards to speed up adoption while preserving the safeguards against misuse. They're looking at building some like almost AI proving grounds for people to work on emerging agentic systems. And they're moving away from that rigid contracting to a more flexible, iterative partnerships that really mimic that tech sector innovation cycle that we've seen, especially in Silicon Valley. They've got communities of interest with the frontier companies as well as people across the Department of War. And it's really encouraging that we're seeing these pathways where private sector advances can be adopted into the defense context.
Yeah, I am super proud, and this is cross administrations, right? So it's non-political in nature. I am excited. I am enthused by the amount of co-partnership that's taken place right now. I love the fact that we have a very legitimate AI action plan that was released, with 26 pages, and on the 25th page, it had high impact use cases. I think that can even go faster and further. I like the shrinking that I'm hearing from the department leadership that's asking people, how do we go to OEMs direct, right? How do we remove middle people, especially if we say it's commercial off the shelf or it's right cloud available, it's easy, it's low code, no code, it's easy to adopt. Why is it taking us so long? I like the idea of, failing and failing fast. I also like the idea of choice. For so long in government, we had the RFP, the bake-off. It was either or, as opposed to this methodology that I'm starting to see today that says, if you can solve the problem, everybody can play. Our government and our citizenry, right, 330 million people demand better experiences. So the more players that I get that I can solve and they can all coexist, I think is a powerful place for us to be. And I'm super excited about youth returning to government. I think for the first time, right, we're starting to see the slow uptick of the below 30s and the early 30 to 40-year-olds who are joining government as a call to service. And when they do that, right, I couldn't be prouder of a company like mine that just went public on Mission Force for all the frontline responders to be able to deliver those tools at their fingertips for decisive operational effects. Whether those are on the southern border or taxpayer 360 to speed up the way that we process taxes, or helping NASA onboard interns for the exploration and collaboration with all of industry partners. I think this is an exciting time. I'm certain Amanda agrees with me to both be in government, but to be at the crossroads of industry, academia, and government, leading the revolution for what's next.
I think if there's one thing for our audience to take away today is that agentic AI is not to be slept on. It's going to revolutionize how we operate and really, truly transform how our government is delivering services to everyone across the nation and to our service members. So, is there anything else either of you would like to add before we end our discussion today?
I think you covered it all, Sylvia.
Yeah, just a hearty thanks, Sylvia, to you and the entire team. My recommendation just to everybody is figure out this is a question of operational risk. So the sooner that you can dive in, right, with your own guardrails, leveraging the data that sits in your own backyard in that zero trust, zero copy environment, to start buying your people the white space to think bigger and bolder and more brilliantly, the better.